What if the most dangerous woman in 16th century Spain wasn't a seductress or spy, but a nun whose very prayers could defy the laws of physics? In the shadowed corridors of Spanish convents, whispers spread of a woman whose body would rise from the ground during prayer, floating in divine ecstasy while witnesses watched in stunned silence. Teresa of Avila wasn't your typical femme fatale, yet she wielded a power more intoxicating than any earthly charm. Her weapon wasn't seduction, but something far more dangerous: direct communion with the divine. Spain in the 1500s was a nation drunk on religious fervor and imperial conquest. The Inquisition cast its dark shadow across the land, hunting heretics with ruthless efficiency. In this world of rigid religious orthodoxy, women were expected to remain silent, obedient, and invisible. But Teresa Sánchez de Cepeda y Ahumada had other plans. Born into minor nobility in 1515, Teresa's early life seemed destined for conventional piety, yet beneath her demure exterior burned an ambition that would shake the foundations of Spanish Catholicism. At 20, she entered the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation in Avila. But this wasn't the retreat from worldly power it appeared to be. It was her launching pad to influence. The convent life of Teresa's era was far from the austere spirituality we might imagine. Nuns entertained visitors in parlors, wore jewelry, and lived comfortable lives funded by wealthy families. Teresa initially embraced this lifestyle, but something within her yearned for more. Not more comfort, but more intensity, more connection to the divine source of all power. Then came the visions. At 39, Teresa began experiencing what she called raptures and ecstasies. These weren't gentle moments of prayer. They were overwhelming spiritual encounters that left her gasping, weeping, and sometimes physically levitating above the ground. Witnesses described seeing her rise 3 to 4 feet in the air, her face radiant with otherworldly light, completely unconscious of her surroundings. These supernatural experiences weren't just personal spiritual moments. They became Teresa's credentials, her proof of divine favor that no earthly authority could dispute. In a world where women's voices were systematically silenced, Teresa had found the ultimate trump card. God himself seemed to be speaking through her, but Teresa was too intelligent to rely solely on mystical experiences. She understood that power required strategy, alliances, and careful political maneuvering. She began writing detailed accounts of her visions, crafting a literary persona that was both humble and authoritative. Her autobiography, written under orders from her confessors, became a masterpiece of spiritual psychology and subtle self-promotion. The dangerous game Teresa played was reform. She looked at the comfortable, worldly convents around her and declared them spiritually bankrupt. She envisioned a return to primitive Carmelite rule: barefoot nuns, strict poverty, complete enclosure, and intense contemplative prayer. This wasn't just religious idealism, it was revolutionary. Her reform movement threatened the established religious hierarchy. Wealthy families who funded convents didn't want their daughters living in harsh conditions. Local bishops feared losing control over profitable religious institutions. The Inquisition suspected that mystical experiences like Teresa's might be demonic deceptions or heretical innovations. Yet Teresa navigated these treacherous waters with the skill of a master diplomat. She cultivated relationships with powerful men who became protectors and enablers. Her confessor, the Jesuit Francisco de Borja, was himself a saint and former duke. She charmed King Philip II's confessor, securing royal support for her reforms. She corresponded with influential theologians, always presenting herself as an obedient daughter of the Church, while quietly pursuing her revolutionary agenda. The levitation incidents became her signature calling card. Witnesses described how Teresa would suddenly be caught up in ecstasy during Mass or prayer. Her body would rise from the ground, sometimes grasping desperately at communion rails or altar steps, trying to prevent the embarrassing spectacle. She claimed these experiences were beyond her control, occurring despite her efforts to resist them. One particularly dramatic incident occurred during a visit to a noble family. As Teresa knelt in prayer before the household altar, she began to levitate in front of the assembled family and guests. The sight was so overwhelming that several witnesses fainted. Word of this event spread throughout Spanish high society, cementing Teresa's reputation as a living saint. But were these experiences genuine supernatural phenomena, or was Teresa a master manipulator using theatrical spirituality to achieve worldly goals? The question haunted her contemporaries and continues to intrigue historians today. What's undeniable is that these mystical experiences gave Teresa unprecedented authority for a woman of her era. She founded 17 reformed convents across Spain, each one a center of intense spiritual practice and subtle resistance to conventional religious authority. Her nuns were trained not just in prayer, but in the art of spiritual direction and mystical theology. They became a network of influential women who challenged traditional gender roles while maintaining the protective cover of religious orthodoxy. Teresa's most dangerous quality wasn't her mystical experiences, but her brilliant mind. She wrote extensively on prayer, mystical theology, and convent administration. Her works combined practical wisdom with profound spiritual insight, creating a body of literature that influenced Catholic spirituality for centuries. She developed a sophisticated psychology of spiritual development, mapping the soul's journey toward divine union with scientific precision. The Interior Castle, her masterpiece, describes the soul as a crystal castle with 7 rooms, each representing a stage of spiritual development. This wasn't just religious poetry, it was a handbook for spiritual power, teaching readers how to cultivate the kind of intimate relationship with God that could transcend all earthly limitations. Her correspondence reveals the full scope of her influence. She wrote thousands of letters to nobles, bishops, and fellow reformers, offering spiritual guidance while subtly advancing her reform agenda. These letters show a woman of remarkable intelligence and political savvy, capable of flattering powerful men while never compromising her core principles. The Inquisition investigated Teresa multiple times, suspicious of her mystical claims and reform activities. Each investigation ended with her vindication, but the threat remained constant. She walked a tightrope between orthodoxy and innovation, always maintaining that her experiences came directly from God while never claiming personal holiness or special authority. Perhaps Teresa's greatest achievement was transforming the perception of female mysticism. Before her, women's spiritual experiences were often viewed with suspicion or dismissed as hysteria. Teresa's careful documentation and theological sophistication elevated mystical experience to a respected form of religious knowledge. She died in 1582, her reform movement firmly established across Spain and beginning to spread internationally. The woman who had entered a comfortable convent as a minor noble's daughter left behind a legacy that would influence Catholic spirituality for centuries. Teresa once wrote, "Let nothing disturb you. All things pass. God does not change. Patience obtains all. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices." These words reveal the source of her extraordinary power, absolute confidence in her divine connection that made earthly authority seem insignificant. The Catholic Church canonized Teresa in 1622 and in 1970 declared her a Doctor of the Church, one of only 4 women to receive this highest theological honor. But perhaps her most lasting achievement was proving that spiritual power could be more dangerous and transformative than any conventional weapon. In a world that tried to silence women's voices, Teresa of Avila found a way to speak with divine authority. Her levitations weren't just mystical curiosities, they were declarations of independence from earthly limitations. She rose above the constraints of her gender, her era, and conventional religious practice, leaving behind a legacy that continues to challenge and inspire. The barefoot nun from Avila had wielded the most dangerous power of all, the ability to transform souls and reshape religious practice through the sheer force of her mystical authority. In the end, Teresa of Avila proved that the most captivating femme fatale might just be the one who seduces not with earthly charms, but with the promise of divine transcendence.